Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Tricked For. This is Gray. Yeah, it's not just a monkey song. It's this episode of It's All Been Tricked For, but it's also this episode of TNG. Speaking of which, you can now. I'm going to bring it up. Patreon.com/IABD. Great way to support the network. Great way to support us. Deep Space Nine's coming up. You can help us get there. Your $2 also. $2, however much. There's a lot of great tiers. Check them out. I'm on one of those. Go support us there. But for a very small monthly fee, you can see us in the flesh, as in the flesh as you can get these days. You can get the video portion at Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/IABD to support us. I know it didn't seem black and white, but that's why we're talking shades of gray on It's All Been Tricked Before.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Tricked Before. We're talking the Season 2 finale, and your regular hosts have returned.
This is Steven.
And a clip of Keith from past episodes.
Yeah, Keith's not here. We're just going to play clips of him from past. Keith, say something so they know that's not
I don't know how I could prove it at this point.
Hold up today's newspaper.
I'll have to pull something out.
Keith's actually here, and so am I, Jimmy-Jerome. The three of us are here to talk about Shades of Grey, a.k.a. The Clip Show. Impressions, gentlemen.
I'm embarrassed that it took me as long as it did to recognize that this was indeed a clip show.
How long did it take you?
I wrote a note. It was actually the second part of the first set of dreams, I think.
Yeah.
So Picard calls Data Pinocchio. That was like, wait a minute, did this happen before? And then the next scene came up. I'm like, nope. Wait a minute. Is this a clip? This is a clip show. Yeah. So
I recognized it the second clip. I had known and then forgotten. And when he went out to yell at the mountain, I didn't get that as a clip. But yeah, the Encounter at Farpoint scene in the holodeck, I was like, oh yeah, clip show. Okay.
Yep.
That wasn't the first one?
No, the first one was Riker on a desolate landscape yelling, Yar, for people. And he yelled Yar's name first, which I noted because at that point I hadn't realized it was a clip. And I was like, really? He yelled for Yar and he didn't yell for Troy. Why not? Yeah, and then I realized that's because it was a clip show.
Oh, yeah, I didn't recognize it at all until
and he didn't have a beard.
The holodeck, yes. So I was thinking, one of my notes at first was like, oh my god, did they make him shave for this?
That's what I did. So I guess it took me a little while. I was still waiting on that too.
The transition, I think, into the holodeck made me think that maybe they had new footage, but certainly that scene with him and talking to Data and the whistling and everything.
That was the second clip they showed.
Okay.
And that was the one where we all got it.
Was there new footage for some of the transitions or something?
Nope.
I'm trying to.
Nope.
They maybe buy it for a second there. I thought that he really was like extending the scene at least.
Yeah, I kept looking, thinking, will there be a difference here? And there was not.
It felt like something was longer, and I couldn't put my finger on it. It seemed like they were lingering on his reactions differently or something. Like maybe they added something, but
you could be right, but I don't think so. The problem was they ran out of budget this season, and so this is what we get. So I hated this episode. Spoiler.
Sorry, I didn't mention that, but I did too.
I found the clips so annoying and tedious to sit through.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, and we'll get into this more, if you took out the Pulaski story and actually had an original B-plot, I think I would have really liked this. Mm-hmm. Or used the dreams differently to do new stuff, I would have really liked this episode. The fact that they played clips, every time they played a new clip, this episode went lower in my estimation.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree.
It's weird because I like rewatching shows I like.
Mm-hmm.
I've always hated clip shows, even before DVDs and streaming made them irrelevant.
One of the comparisons we can make as far as like internally with Star Trek would be the whatever episode that was with the chair, the beeping chair. They were doing the trial.
Oh, the menagerie. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I like the menagerie.
But that's how you recreate. That's how you do a clip show. Or a clip show. It really wasn't a clip show.
It wasn't a clip show because Cage
that's true.
And you were telling one cohesive story.
Right.
Yes. It was referring to one specific episode.
In fact, I remember we ranked the menagerie really high. Even though we'd recently seen the Cage.
Yeah. And back in the day when I was ranking episodes, in the late 70s, early 80s. The Menagerie was always high. I'm sure it still is always high on lists. Same as The Cage. Yeah, they're both great
For
episodes.
some reason, that's the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
Because of the specific way they handled it.
Yeah.
And it was super relevant to the story. And here's the thing. If we get a montage in a character's final episode as a goodbye with sappy music and stuff, I like those too.
Right.
I think my problem here was the clip show was such a thin premise where they only showed clips of Riker's life from the last year and a half and nothing before that. And some of the clips were not from his perspective and he wasn't even present for them, even though they're supposed to be happening in his brain. That it just did not make
Oh, I didn't catch that. I should have paid attention.
Oh,
I wrote
that's
that down
specifics.
I wrote his dreams have so many camera angles.
It made absolutely no sense the way
that was my menagerie thing, which I thought was I love too, just when they do that.
If they'd mixed just a couple of clips in with a lot of new footage of a younger Riker, it would have been great.
Well, I think, Jimmy, it goes to your very first point. If there had been a better story around it, or a B story, because the reason the Menagerie is great is because it's heartbreaking. Like The Cage, it's heartbreaking. Venus' story at the end is heartbreaking. The Menagerie, everybody's hearts are breaking at the end because it's like this, everyone's trying to do the right thing for this guy, and they are, and whatever. Even the Telosians are trying to do the right thing. Actually, they are doing the right thing for once. And that's how you create a great story around clips, for lack of a better term. And again, I know it's not apples and oranges, or it's not apples to apples, it's apples and oranges, but still.
But if we're getting into Riker's memories to deal with this stuff, we need to see his childhood. We need to see his and Troy's early relationship. We need to see his early Starfleet experiences. Right. Just playing clips from the last year and a half makes no sense whatsoever.
As far as the story itself goes, the one positive thing that I had at the beginning was, before I knew this was going to be a clip show, first of all, was I liked that they kind of started with him already having been pricked by the thorn. And the investigation up to that point, it seemed like this is okay. We skipped some other things. It was kind of efficient, was the word I used.
Started in the middle of a scene, like you're supposed to do with the play or anything really, but yeah.
Well, and then also the added value to the investigation with Troy, with Geordi and Data. I liked that.
That was the good part.
The first 16 minutes weren't clip show. It was after the third of the way mark it became a clip show.
When the needles all go into his head, the parallel lines cover for Blondie. I think it was Parallel Lines.
For the premise around the clip show itself, or the clip portion of it, it's hard for me to imagine if, being young enough or whenever, I would have bought that he was going to die. Bought that there was an actual stake, that they weren't going to just figure this out. And I think that's a big part of it. It hinged on them trying to figure something, a cure for him. And the cure ended up being clips. So
that's true.
It's hard to... Yeah, it's hard for me to buy the actual peril of what was being put forth there.
It put Pulaski and Troy in this terrible spot and I felt bad because one of the clips shows Troy, I think it's from The Child, but I could be wrong, and she's just bawling her eyes out. But this episode put her and Pulaski in this terrible spot of every time they come out of it, Pulaski's like, it seems like it's making things worse. It seems like things are getting better. And Troy just saying, please, Will, don't die, or whatever. And that was it. That was like, and then nobody else came in. Picard stopped in at the beginning of the episode, and then, see you, buddy.
Picard stopped in a couple times at the beginning.
And Pulaski literally, he says, how can I help? Pulaski's like, get out of my hair. Bye, see ya. He's done.
He's like, well.
That was the second time he asked what he could do to help them. He was really keeping tabs. So we'll go back to the beginning here. Like Keith was saying, what struck me about the opening scenes is it felt like bits were missing from the cold open. There were very abrupt cuts. I'm not complaining about him getting stuck by the Thor necessarily, but that scene, the transporter scene with Pulaski, the whole thing, it felt like they were half-finished scenes to me.
I think that's fair. I thought it was weird they set that scene on Dagobah. I thought that was really weird.
Yeah, Yoda would have told him he could just think the microbes out of his body. Did you like the I did think you guys would enjoy that they talked about transport technology and
I wrote down the biofilter is back.
Yes.
No, it was I really liked the way that they it seemed like they were taking their time and working through that in a way that they wouldn't usually do it. It makes me it kind of devalues it now that you put it into perspective of a budget thing, though, which bothers me. They were actually doing a lot of interesting close-ups on the panels, and whether or not they made any sense for what they were saying, as far as here's exactly what the computer was telling me about the microbes, and pointing to these random serial numbers. And
the setup is actually good.
Well, I love that for Pulaski's last episode, you give her a medical mystery to dig into. That's a great concept.
Yeah.
And also Pulaski working the instruments in the sick bay. They showed some pretty good close-ups of that, and the buttons she was pressing. Again, I don't know that makes sense for what she was doing. Maybe she had some hotkeys set up already. But
so if you want to give this episode real stakes, decide a little bit earlier Pulaski's not coming back, make her the one that gets stabbed, and she dies. Or she catches it from Riker mid-episode somehow, and she dies, and that
is brilliant. I mean, right? Again, did they know she was not coming back? I guess was the thing.
I don't know.
Do we have to go through a clip show of her memories?
No,
just from this season.
In every iteration I have of this that works, the clips are gone. Like I said, I would buy one or two if mixed in with a bunch of new footage of old memories.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
So I loved O'Brien teasing Pulaski about the transporter at the beginning.
Yeah. We finally drove home the McCoy point.
Yes.
So I will mention O'Brien because this struck me, so I had to look it up. It seemed like we had him a lot this season. He's in like 17 of the 22 episodes or something. He was only in 2 season 1 episodes. Season 3 and 4, he's going to be in like 12 or 13 episodes apiece. And then we'll only get him 5 times in season 5, 2 times in season 6, and the series finale for season 7. So I was worried that they blew all their O'Brien load in this season, but we still have 2 more good O'Brien seasons before they start to back him off to send him over to DS9.
Okay.
And then, like I said, he stars on DS9 for all 7 seasons, so we've got plenty of O'Brien in our future. I liked the Killer Vine whole thing and Geordi and Data's investigation, like Keith said. That was cool.
Yep.
I did want to know, Riker's sick in sick bay. They don't give him a TV or anything to entertain him?
Yeah, this goes into my other thing. The black medical advances or lack thereof. They solved the common cold, but they still have to drill needles into his head?
That didn't bother me.
It just seemed barbaric to me. And by the way, it was Debbie Harry's. Yeah, Debbie Harry's solo album "Cuckoo" is the one where she's being punctured by 8 different needles. It's an H.R. Geiger thing, actually. But
the needles didn't bother me, but they really took the time of the camera lingering on the inserting. And again, that could have been a budget thing of let's just show all this because we don't have anything else to fill it with. The creature or whatever it was just made me think. And they almost said this. They almost said they put creatures in his body. So I liked Riker being ornery when he first got sick. I kind of liked that whole, you got to keep a face in front of the crew thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And still being teasing. I thought it was good character development and a good representation of who Riker is.
This is the thing that was actually going to fooling me into thinking that I was going to like this episode more, or rather, this is what would make me want to rank this episode higher when I dig into the parts before they just kind of resort to the clips. Even the interstitials with Troy, I thought that she was doing a really good job, or at least the Marina Sirtis was doing a good job with the material that she was given.
And Diana Mulder. And Jonathan Frakes.
I forgot the beginning of this episode was actually good until
it was.
Once the clip started.
I thought that cold open felt a little disjointed, but after that, I was on board until we got to the clips.
Because I like the scene where Picard and Riker have that little talk in sick bay. That's a really good scene too.
It is.
So we're gonna maybe manage to talk Jimmy out of putting this on the absolute bottom.
No,
I don't know about that.
Really, I guess in all things, I will say that I'm a proponent of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater for most things. It's just
I had a nickel for every baby I threw out with the bathwater. I tell
you, the squandered opportunity of this story, will tick me off more than anything. The fact that had they had the budget to actually film scenes for the visions Riker was having, it could have been an amazing episode. Makes me so angry that this is what we got. If that makes sense. And I think that is what overrides for me the redeeming qualities of the first third of the episode is this could have been so good and instead was so bad that
Well-
I'm not going to give it credit for the little bit of good that was there.
What I'd like that makes me want to ask you a couple follow-up questions or to really get into why that makes you angry. The idea of that, is it because you think that there were people who squandered the budget, or because there were some executives who didn't give them enough money to begin with? I mean, you would punish the episode for the executives, or it's like,
so it would be very difficult to make a really good episode with no budget. The fact that this season was already 4 episodes shorter than most seasons because of the writer's strike makes me think they should have been given a little extra budget.
Yeah.
But I guess at this point in my life, and it is very much a product of this point in my life, I am furious that this country values money over other things, over human lives, over people's satisfaction in work, and I think this country has been ruined by our pursuit of money and greed. With the coronavirus, the half lockdown and then getting everybody back to work and letting people die just so businesses can make a few bucks instead of helping people survive with some government bailout that's directed to the people that need it. That's just a quick taste, but I'm very angry about money right now and its place in our culture. And so I think that probably exacerbates even more. I guess I really hadn't broken it down the way you asked it, Keith, but yes, I would be more angry at the studio for not giving them enough money to do a good episode than I would be at them for spending budget, because I can't really point to an episode I felt budget was being squandered on.
In the opening credits at the end, right before the end, where the Enterprise just kind of comes into view, I love that shot every time. It just excites me every time to see it, the way it comes into view. I appreciate Geordi's dexterity, but couldn't they have taken a specimen jar to get that thing and put it in that?
Oh.
Or, and I know I'm using a 21st century device for it, a specimen jar, but isn't there some kind of, I feel like we've seen, like even Khan on SETI
A baggie, maybe? Something?
Khan on SETI Alpha 5 had better places to put it than they did.
When Geordi leaves the transporter room, it looks like he pulls out a container to put it in. So I think he was just messing with them, or decided for the moment to carry it up.
Okay. I like when Riker said, I think Riker says it to Picard, he's surprised this doesn't happen more.
Yeah.
He might have said it to Pulaski. Either way, it makes total sense. We're exploring. It makes sense. It's surprising. And then Troy calls him Imzadi. And I was like, she said it. She said it. So that was exciting to me.
I noted that without even knowing the significance of it yet.
Yeah.
I don't remember this episode at all. I don't remember having seen it. Maybe I did. Maybe, I don't remember having seen it. And my thought of that, once I realized it was a clip show, was that quite possibly they just wouldn't have rerun it very often because it was a clip show. So
Keith, in your clip show, this memory would not show up.
No, it would as part of the device.
Runs out of budget.
They would run it, because as a thing of like, here's something that he didn't remember, here's why he didn't remember it, and
then they would show Woos and I watching the episode that you weren't there for.
Yes.
So I watched season 2 on DVD last time I watched season 2, and I don't remember watching this, but I had to have because I watched the whole second season on DVD.
That is weird, isn't it? I mean, there's got to be something. So
blocked out how horrible it was.
Yeah.
I was going to, I guess, the aspect of it being a clip show that I noted is that even though obviously it bothered you and probably all of us to some extent, it's kind of fortunate that it ended up being a clip show, because it is that, as for a season wrap up, it reminds of some things I would have forgotten. Shows some scenes that I'd forgotten about. He's still shaking his head, but
no, I am shaking my head. Other than that scene of Riker yelling into the void that they did as the first clip, I remembered every single scene they showed because they picked the bigger scenes. And granted, there were definitely a couple of scenes I did not mind rewatching, but most of them I felt like my time was being wasted.
I'm talking.
the same way.
I'm not saying that the entire scene was helpful in that sense. It was, I guess, it was helpful for me in my memory to be able to just go like, "Hey, remember this thing? Let me refresh your memory about these other episodes before we get to this other." Like every time we go to the ranking, for example, I go, "Wait, what? What happened when?" And I'm just saying that. That's all.
I do have to refresh my memory with the ranking, but I didn't feel like this clip show helped me with that. They just picked the big things that I remembered anyway.
It reminded me of a couple episodes I really liked, and it reminded me of a couple episodes I really didn't. So
Let's jump into the clips here.
Yep.
We're 16 minutes in.
All right.
And I wrote, now it's just a clip show. Those are my exact notes. We get the huge encounter at Farpoint scene, which was really long and felt like a super weird choice to include of Riker meeting Data. Did not have much relevance to anything. And the only thing I really noticed in the episode was Data's makeup was way different in the pilot.
Yes. Yes.
I remember liking Data's acting then, as far as like the I am this bright organism that is not quite human kind of thing. It really came across, but other than that, yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
So right after that were two scenes I loved, and they almost got me back for half a second, even though I really thought the encounter at Farpoint went on way too long. It was awful. The Guinan-Riker flirt scene.
Oh, yeah, it was so good.
I'll watch that every day for the rest of my life.
And that was one I kept thinking as I was watching, like, is this going to go a different direction maybe this time? And I was like, nope. But I was like, man, I love that scene. I was just,
That one, and then it was followed up with Riker's goodbye to Troy when he thought he was taking the promotion.
Again, that's a good one.
Captainship.
That's a really good one.
But the problem with that is by the time I was halfway through it, as much as I was enjoying Riker and Troy's performance and comparing it to the relationship now and reminding me like that's why Troy's the one that's there with Pulaski, we really needed scenes from what happened in the show Imzadi to be part of the clips right there. We needed that backstory of Riker and Troy to make the goodbye meaningful. That was where they started to lose me, and then they just kept losing me. So they ramp up the intensity, apparently, and then he goes to the planet of the pretty blondes, which makes sense.
I have a couple notes on that.
Except Riker doesn't enter that scene until like a minute in. So we got to see the scene without Riker in it.
Yes.
But then I was like, oh yeah, but there's Yar. Yay, Yar's back. Steven, you were probably like, who's that blonde?
I had to look it up on Wikipedia.
So he thought before that Yar thing he was just like pirate talking at the beginning.
Who are they talking?
Yar into the
Yar!
void.
So I wrote down Blonde Paradise episode underrated. It's actually Justice, right?
It wasn't underrated.
It isn't, but with no shame, unfortunately, I watched that scene twice because Bill Teese, amazing job. He should have won an Emmy for that episode. The way that every one of those women in that scene, and to an extent, it makes sense that Riker would remember it that way. He's like, all I remember is almost seeing all these beautiful blondes' butts.
I mean, Riker's memory, they probably should have been even skimpier.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of those things, like, in my mind, I'm like, is this slightly different? And I'm like, no, it isn't. But and my one other note on that is, I hope that is the way my life flashes before my eyes. It's exactly like. And then as I was reading this note earlier, I'm like, that can't be right. And I'm like, oh wait, it references that specific episode, that specific clip. Yeah, I still hope that's the way my life flashes before my eyes.
So
we ranked Justice number 14 of 25 in season 1.
Yeah, I remember.
Yep, underrated.
It was a great episode. Yeah.
Yep, underrated.
I think that's probably about where it deserves to be.
Nope,
It
underrated.
probably is, but you know what? I'll equate that to this one. I'll watch the first 16 minutes of that one over and over and not watch the rest of it.
Okay.
So as I alluded to earlier, I kept thinking that these were all like extended versions of the scenes sometimes. I didn't remember some of the details.
Me too.
And there's something about the way it was framed that I guess I started picking up things I didn't pick up the first time, which if for no other reason than to refresh my memory about some things that I had watched, there's that. The cynical value of that, if you start talking about budget and just the placement of things for whatever reason, yes, it is very hard to get behind it or enjoy what is happening.
Well, we haven't got to where it really falls apart for me. As much as I hated the Encounter at Farpoint extended scene, so far I'm still relatively on board what we've talked through so far.
Well, I did have one other thing to say about Justice before we move on, though.
Sure.
And for that,
I'm still on board during the Justice scene as well.
For that, I was starting to channel Marianne, my wife, who, if viewers or listeners
Frequent guest.
don't know that, yes,
Have we met her before?
perhaps.
Is her last name Yar? Is that who Yar is?
Yeah, Marianne Yar. She usually, when we're watching things like this, notices mail packages far more frequently than I do.
Sure.
I managed to gloss over that sort of thing, but this time,
I wonder why.
I don't know. This time I kept trying to I sympathized with some of the men in their costumes and tried to think if I had to wear just like one guy I just zeroed in on. It was just so flat fronted, almost like a little front butt thing happening.
Yeah.
Just like I can't imagine having to wear that and having to strap everything down and just.
That's actually what I wear around the house. Now that I'm working from home, I'm wearing that 5 days a week.
Wait a minute, back up. Were you guys saying there were men in that clip? Now this is the Joe Rogan podcast, but yeah.
No, but
They all look like you, Woos.
Okay, that makes
They're all blonde and in shape. So then after that, we show Minuet, which I'm like, another good choice if we're going through that theme of Riku's life.
Yep.
At this point, Encounter lost me. They started to get me back. I was like, let's add some more Imzadi stuff, but okay. And then Troy talks about Riker's feeling passionate, and Pulaski's like, is that like erotic? And Troy's like, yes. And I'm like, okay, so where are we going next? And then immediately we're back to more Minuet, which I'm like, yeah, absolutely, of course. I'm on board there. Then we got him sleeping with the planetary leader, which I'm not as thrilled about, but whatever, it makes sense for what they were doing. And then the Irish woman, and I was like, okay, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm fully back in.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Although, again, I'm like, where's the erotic jungle sex with Troy? Spoiler from Imzadi.
Yep.
That should have been part of this.
Yep.
Well, now I don't need to read it.
Yeah, you do.
That's it. The whole thing's been ruined.
Jungle sex, it's ruined.
Yeah.
Anyway. So then we get back to Pulaski, and it feels like at this point she's just trying things, and her story's fallen apart too. And that's the other thing that bothers me. When they go fully into the clip show, the Pulaski Troy stuff stops being compelling and starts just being dumb.
Yep.
And Pulaski's basically, I don't understand this. I'm just trying different impulses to see what happens. Yet in a desperate situation, that may be what you have to do, but it felt so bad to me that that's what they had resorted to.
It was, this will be the Star Wars part of this podcast. It's in Phantom Menace when Anakin's in the ship with his little space helmet, and he's like, let's see what this does. Spinning's a good trick. It's like exactly that. That's exactly what she was doing. She was like, look, maybe this will do something. Well, maybe this will. Yeah.
So here's where I started to get really annoyed with the episode. Like, by this point, I'm just done. So we now see Yar's death, which makes sense as a moment we would see.
Sure.
What doesn't make sense here, because that's followed up by the death of Troy's son, which, from the child,
Yeah.
which while that doesn't necessarily mean anything to Riker, personally, I believe he has a very deep depth of caring for Troy. And because that meant so much to her, I can see that affecting him because he has to watch her go through it. And so I didn't realize at first, like, what this all was, but I was like, okay, so those two things should have been the height of the negative intensity they used to kill off this organism. Because everything that comes after that is not nearly as affecting as those two moments of Yar being killed and Troy's son dying. So then we get into, they start doing negative emotions, kill it, which I swear is an original series episode.
Yeah, that definitely.
Riker. So then we see Riker on the Klingon ship, and I'm like, how is that a negative scene? That was a positive experience.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, Wolf in the Fold. Remember the Jack the Ripper being fed on negative, and so they all start laughing, and it goes away.
There you go. That's the one.
Yep.
What? And then to the Klingon clip, besides being totally out of place, for the first time, I don't think we talked about this on the Klingon episode, but why the heck did the Klingons all speak English for Riker?
See, it is useful.
Using a universal translator speaking Klingon for them.
Without this clip show, you wouldn't have gotten to that point for the season wrap up, and
I guess, but
it's
that
done
really
you a huge
bothered me
service.
because it's like, I'm going to go to Germany and make all the Germans speak English so I can be understood.
Doesn't the
Makes no
Klingon
sense.
commander turn and say, "Speak his language"?
Yes.
Yeah.
That bothered me so much on this watch.
Yeah.
Why?
Because he's in the middle of a bunch of Klingons that speak Klingon, he can use a universal translator or learn a bit of the language. They should not have the whole ship speaking English because this one guest is aboard.
I have some counterexamples for that from real life in a way, but before we get to that, I honestly hadn't thought about the universal translator. Had that kind of, how does that? Because God, they really don't accentuate that very much. I mean, we don't know. It always feels like everyone is speaking English when they're doing that. But they actually do show a lot of scenes in this series. If you think back, where you have subtitles come up because they don't.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know.
Every scene talking to a new alien race on the view screen, supposedly that alien's speaking their language and we're getting a universal translator, even though their lips are moving to match the English.
Yeah. I thought the worst part of that scene on Klingon ship was where Riker said, "My name is Riker. What is yours?" And then he kept repeating that. I thought that was weird.
So when I was in high school, I went to France with like an exchange program thing. Our whole class went over there, stayed with some families, and they came to stay with us, for a couple of weeks. When I was there, they all were eager to speak English in the sense that their education system was that much better, where they were, if not fluent, pretty close, or at least the person I stayed with and his family, or rather, he and his sister, they seemed pretty fluent in English. Most of the other students seemed much closer to being able to communicate. We were just nowhere close to being able to just use French in that sense. Well, I guess in a way that kind of taps into, again, the way the writing goes, the human-centric view of things, the English-centric view of things, is that English is the language that everybody would want to use to speak common, in RPG speak. This is the default
Federation standard.
Yeah, is it officially that?
Yeah, Federation standard.
Well, there you go. I mean,
for the whole UFP.
Yeah.
The first time, not the first time I went overseas, when I went to Acapulco early, like 2001, and I kept trying to speak what limited Spanish I have, and they would always speak English back to me. So eventually, it would just be like, "Hola," and then it was just that whole time. And eventually, I was like, "All right, screw it, I'll speak English." I thought you guys wanted to speak Spanish, but they're like, "No, let's just cut to the chase," which I get.
Yeah.
Keith, were you ever in a cafe and there was a lovely young lady named Gabrielle? By any chance?
I would imagine that there were probably Gabrielles in any place I went, but I wouldn't have known. I will say, but
Did you see blondes and belly shirts?
Not to my recollection, but my memory of pretty much everything is just, who knows.
That would have been a great other podcast, but now I guess we're gonna have to scratch that.
So then, even though it's intensifying, we go to lesser dangerous scenes. The scary brain sucker that tried to take over his mind. Was that Jameson? No, that wasn't Admiral Jameson. Where he's like, where Riker's like, I'm going to call somebody. Like, they don't want to talk to them. They want to talk to you. It won't like them. It likes you.
Oh.
The fight scene. It was actually a fight scene between Riker and the old Admiral.
That thing was hilarious.
Oh, right.
The stunt doubles are so bad in that scene. Why pick that scene for a clip show?
We probably talked about it. This was actually the other clip I watched twice because I couldn't believe how terrible the body doubles were. And we probably talked about it the first time around.
Probably.
The other thing was both those guys were doing the kick that maybe they stole it from here. Samir does in Office Space when they go to destroy the printer.
Oh, you mean
the leg just goes way up?
I think that's like an axe kick, maybe, or
I think it's a specific thing. Yeah,
it looks unreal. Like your body doesn't bend that way.
It cracked me up. I like a printer. You could probably do that too because it's not gonna attack you back probably. But yeah, that scene was insane.
And then we get David Marcus. I know that wasn't his name, but the actor. Like, trying to steal Riker's heart or whatever. Ferengi whips. Armis again, but the scene continues after Riker sinks below the Artemis or whatever, the thing that killed Yar. It pulls Riker into the target, and he sinks, but the clip continues.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I am willing to buy that other than the two death scenes,
the different camera angles.
Riker being sunk into that tar might have been his scariest moment. But these other scenes are just so not in the right order for what they're trying to communicate.
Yeah.
Then they go to the auto destruct sequence. I'm like, how is that worse than getting sucked under the tar?
Yeah.
And then there's another Klingon scene where they're carrying the Klingon out of the space station that's like really injured, or spaceship, whatever it was. And there were several cut scenes. They kept going to the bridge and to Tashiar in the transporter room while Riker's still over on that ship being rescued. So again, a bunch of scenes that don't fit at all. And then they started doing really fast clips and repeating themselves, and that was the end of the clip show. But it just felt terrible to me.
All right, see that if I hadn't been convinced before, I think your best point is the way that they haphazardly arranged it. Well, I think it's more like they arranged them almost like in order of familiarity, and maybe even sequentially. They could have been doing that, like chronologically, so to speak. But the idea for what the framework should have been like in order of intensity.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with that, and.
It just seemed like such an easy out when he actually came out of it.
Yeah. Was the last one the explosion one where everything just keeps blowing up?
Yeah.
So
which, again, exterior shots that Riker would not have witnessed.
it made me laugh for a number of reasons, but
and the fact that those explosions wouldn't happen that way in space.
Right. Well, that's a different thing.
We need Neil deGrasse Tyson to come on here and tell us how unrealistic that is.
That's right. So I'm a big Sklar Brothers fans. I listen to their podcasts, and they've been showing the old series Cheap Seats, where they just sit in the kind of Mystery Science Theater 3000 terrible sporting events. But one of their openings, I think it was their third season, is essentially just everybody blows up in it. And so that's all I can think about in that sequence. And this is like, this is just hilarious. Everything's just blowing up. I only have two other notes. One is, and again, this is a repeat. It's that I think it's the very first part of Riker's dream. There's like a Fortress of Solitude sculpture. I think I'm repeating notes. This is how bad this episode is. It's making repeat notes from the first time I saw these things. My last note is, and I mentioned this earlier, but this is exactly how this note went. Initially, I wrote, "Is this a clip show?" And then later I wrote, "Never mind," as I accepted that it was indeed a clip show, and not a good one.
So when Riker comes out of it, I actually liked the cute Riker-Troy exchange, and Riker teasing Picard, claiming to be Picard. And then Picard says something about me and the Admiral. And like, I wasn't promoted to Admiral.
That was funny.
That was a cute little scene.
That was
just too little, too late.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So I think we should start at the middle when we go to the ranking.
We'll talk about it in a minute, Keith. Guest star wise,
that wasn't a no.
Guest star wise, we didn't have guest stars in this episode unless you count archive footage, which is all of the clips of the guest stars. There were no new guest stars, so I'm not counting guest stars. I mean, we can for the crushes if you want, but I'm not counting them for our notes. Worf and Wesley were both archive only. They did not make actual appearances in this episode, which is lame for a season finale.
Yep.
Well, there's your budget.
The teleplay and story and teleplay were by Maurice Hurley, who had some issues with the show. Maurice Hurley will still write 2 more episodes of the series after this, but this is basically the end of Maurice Hurley's long run. And Maurice Hurley, besides doing this, did Q-Who, Times Square, Data Lore, Hiding Q, Heart of Glory. A lot of the scenes they use the child. A lot of the scenes are from other Maurice Hurley episodes. And not have been coincidental.
Aha, the fix is in. There we go.
Besides coming up with the story, he was helped with the teleplay by Richard Manning, who wrote a couple more episodes after this, including Yesterday's Enterprise, which is a iconic episode we'll get to. But also he wrote The Emissary, which we really liked, with Kalar, Manhunt. He did write The Schizoid Man, Neutral Zone Conspiracy, Skin of Evil. Again, we're getting a lot of those clips. Heart of Glory. And then also helping them write this was Hans Beimler, who's writes a ton of DS9 episodes, so a good writer. But in this episode, he did a lot of co-writing with Richard Manning, The Skin of Evil, Symbiosis, Heart of Glory, Neutral Zone, all of that. So they used 3 different writers to write a show that was half clips. Not all that well done. It was directed by our stalwart Rob Bowman, who directed a whole bunch of Next Gen episodes. This is his penultimate. He only will direct one more after this, but he did Manhunt, Q Who, A Matter of Honor, Elementary Dear Data, The Child, Heart of Glory, Data Lore, a bunch of other stuff. And he will be doing Brothers, which is upcoming as well. Other than that, alternate episodes, Steven.
So I had a bunch of them, but they're really much like this episode. They're the same show. A better clip show. The South Park style clip show, and I know Keith, I don't know if you might remember the one where it's the one where they keep doing the flashbacks, and it's always ends up with that's what I call a sticky situation, where the bus is about to go over the cliff. It's an early one.
Yeah. It's that might have missed my last rewatch.
And then Community did it. I think it was in season 6 even, where they did a clip show, and all the clips were not.
Yes.
They were just all
new scenes.
They were all new scenes, and that's the way you
things
do
like
it.
That. Yes.
Yeah, that would have been better.
I think Teen Titans Go did something like that before, I think, too.
The one show, so that's great because it's not a real clip show, it's just pretending to be one.
Yeah, exactly.
But the real clip show that I actually enjoyed was the animated series Clerks. Did you ever watch that?
Yeah, that was
Based on the movie with
episode
the
2. I think they did a clip show.
It was the second episode, and they only had the first episode to draw clips from. They only made 6 episodes of the series, and so they kept showing the same clips. Fashion.
Did we have anything?
Really got was the blanket with Riker's extremely hairy chest peeking out.
I don't know if the halo, I think that's what they call those things.
Oh yeah,
was
the
would count.
Helmet.
Yeah, I appreciated that they had like the little blood dots when they took it out, because I was like, "What's going?" Oh, right, yes. What even occurred to me
as well, Keith?
Other than that, there's Justice. The clips from that.
Yeah.
Let's get to the rankings.
Starting from the top.
Annoyance scale for Wesley we can bypass because he wasn't in this except in archive footage. Who was your annoyance of the episode? I'm going to go with the writers of this episode. I've never broken the fourth wall.
That was in my head. I've
never broken them off for this category, but they deserve it. They deserve it so much.
I'm going to go with the budgetary committee.
Budgetary committee, okay.
Yeah, whoever, the executives, whoever.
I'm going to go with the editor who cut the sequence from Justice short. There was still more. They could have used some more clips from that.
I'm not going to agree with you for that specifically, but I think an editor could be blamed for part of this as well.
That's true. I think that's fair.
Crush of the episode or season.
I'm going to stick with last week's Ensign Noggle.
Okay. You don't want to, from like the clips of Minuet or Brenna or...
I could pick any of the women in the Justice thing, but I'll stay with this season. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll stay outside the clips.
Okay, Keith.
Same. I mean, it's.
You gonna stay with Kalar?
Yeah, it's just such an amazing performance.
It was an amazing performance. I, though, am going to have a new crush this week, and I think I'm getting around the loophole in our rules. But I'm choosing Crusher as my crush because she was not a lead, so I'm judging her fair play. I almost went with Brenna because they brought her back, and then decided that this was my opportunity to go for Crusher.
Yeah.
I'm going for Crusher.
Yeah. Good call.
Ranking the episode. Best episode or bestest episode of Star Trek?
Middleist. No.
The 3 writers combined to write a great 12 or 16 minutes, whatever.
Our bottom right now is Times Squared.
You read my mind. That's where I'm And that was the Picard double?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oof.
I would go below, but I will let you guys argue it out.
Here's the thing. I mean, there's the premise itself, I think, was still stronger than Times Squared. The parts before they got to the clip show, as we've been saying, we actually enjoyed. I mean, I was on board with what they were doing and the way that they were doing it, and then they just kind of devolved into that thing. And just there's one thing I forgot to mention about the episode. I had one note left, and I think that if there could have been like a sort of half-hearted lesson that they were putting forth here, which was sort of like Riker and his bravado, his forced positivity, I think, was hurting him, I think was the lesson. They were showing that by forcing him to deal with the negative emotions that he'd been suppressing, that could have been symbolically the way to get past
I think
the
that
element.
would have been a really good take if they'd actually done anything in the episode to indicate that to be true.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they were kind of leaving that hidden, but that was the whole thing. Is like they left it all coded in like endorphins. Yeah, they were using the word endorphins to describe positive endorphins or negative endorphins, as far as. But I thought that's what they were going at. That's the reason why there's a the scene we liked early on where Troy was talking to Riker about him doing that, keeping up the brave face and setting the good example and so forth. I think that was a way of setting up what they were going to be doing with the negative emotions later, but I don't think they really did a good job of.
I hated Times Squared, so if you guys are going to argue for it to be above Times Squared, I'm not going to fight you too hard. I would put this at the bottom, below Times Squared, but if you guys want to push it above, I'm not going to.
All right, so
I feel similarly. I'm having a hard time reconciling the 12 minutes I liked with the 33 minutes I hated.
Right.
Although I hated Times Squared too.
I think the 12 minutes I liked, how much I hated makes me angry at the 12 minutes I liked.
Right. And I think you've come full circle back to, you started with this great premise and you ruined it. Whereas Times Squared, they started with a terrible premise. They didn't ruin anything. They just started bad and just stayed there.
Bingo. That's where I'm with you, Steven. That's why I would.
I might agree.
That's why I would put this lower, but
just for the sake of it, what's above Times Square?
I was going to ask.
I knew you were going to want to know.
Yeah.
It's Where Silence Has Lease, which I actually kind of liked.
And that's the face in the cloud?
Yeah.
I think I liked that more than you guys did, but I liked it. The only episode I hated this season besides this one was Times Squared. There were 2 episodes I hated this season, which is fewer episodes than last season. I hated 3 or 4 last season. I have to look.
You know what? I'll end this stalemate. You know what? I did like the beginning of this episode, but I just, on principle, I so did not like the fact that they then threw me into a clip show. I'm putting it at the bottom.
Yeah, I don't disagree enough to argue that. I was
trying to get myself back to when I was watching it last night. And it's like, no, I was very like,
Keith, would you have gone above Where Silence Has Lease?
I don't think so. I mean, I think simply because I don't remember
arguing whether it should be last or next to last.
Yeah, I don't remember the Where Silence Has Lease enough to be able to really pick it apart. But it was still, it felt like they were trying harder at least with that. As much as I liked the parts that they were showing us for the first 12 or 16 minutes or whatever, they were pieces, but they weren't really a good coherent episode, or they weren't really a good, I mean, they were throwing some pieces together purely to prepare for the rest of the framework in the episode when you think back to it. And it was almost like they worked backward from this. And granted that they did a much better job of working backward than they would have needed to, but it still remains that it takes the wind out of it. I guess it can probably go last. Man, wow. As we go, just like the idea of.
I think this episode could have been one of the top 5 or 6 if they'd done it right. I don't think it would have been my first of the season, but I think we could have got it up to 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Honestly, if they did like really good Riker backstory scenes, new filming, maybe we could hit like 3 or 4. Like, it has real potential here.
I think if the first 16 minutes were 12, 16, whatever we really liked, if they'd at least tried to do something with the rest of it that didn't involve clips, I'd have been like, you know what, good try. I'd have been like, good try, and that gets you into like middle, whatever, more of that middle range. But the fact that it was just like, all right, here's a clip show, and it's like, really? It just, for the reasons you mentioned, Jimmy.
But a clip show that was poorly organized.
Yes, a bad clip show.
Yeah, all right, there we go.
Almost all clip shows are bad, but an especially bad clip show.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you have finished talking me into that as well. It's difficult because I really did like some of those parts in that first
They were.
God, the first segment,
it was a great setup.
Yeah.
It was just that's what made it disappointing. And
we're
yeah,
all in agreement. It was a great setup, and like that episode of the original series where we found that they secretly like found the Constitution or whatever, and it completely destroyed.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was going here, and it's like,
yeah,
we're gone. Bye.
Yeah.
Check please. Yeah. I mean, if they had just shown
torture to finish watching this episode. I'm serious. It was torture.
It was such a bait and switch isn't the right term, but either way, it was just like, wait a minute, what? No. And yeah, I spent the next. Is this gonna be? Yeah, it is gonna be the whole episode. Yeah, if they'd just shown the clips from Justice over and over, I would have liked it more than what they did for the rest of the episode. I know that's crass.
Video you can go find.
Yeah, I know that's crass and base, but it's true.
Okay, next week we're gonna do our season 2 wrap up. Before we take our hiatus and do some bonus episodes, do you want to mention that one of our bonus episodes between seasons 2 and 3 is going to be the novel Star Trek Imzadi. If you've never read it, or it's been a while since you've read it, or even if you just finished reading it last week, start reading it again, or for the first time, because it's a great novel. In my opinion, one of the best Trek novels. And
I guess we all fall into one of those categories that you've mentioned.
Yeah, I would hope so. And so definitely start reading that, because in just a few weeks we will bring you our take on Star Trek Imzadi. But until next week when we wrap up season 2, live long.
And until next week, I'll be looking over my list of crushes to figure out how to figure that out. And prosper.
And now we're going to talk Encounter at Farpoint. This is a clip from the premiere of our next generation. Welcome out to It's All Been Trek Before.
This is definitely our worst episode of It's All Been Trek Before.
Oh.
Wow.
It's All Been Done presents
Who's Got the Time?
Until next time, live long.
And prosper.
We'll see you next week on It's All Been Trek Before.
What?
I'm
Oh, God.
we didn't We've waited for you. We didn't record anything without you.
I for a second, I was like, wait a minute. For a second.